Hello and welcome to the Northern Myths podcast, where we explore the myths and legends of Northern Europe from an archetypal perspective. I'm Luke DeWolf.
And I'm Dan Larrabee.
Today we're pleased to welcome onto the show Finnish ethnomusicologist Tuomas Rounakari, who is perhaps best known for his one-man musical project Shamanviolin and as the violin player of folk metal band Korpiklaani. We've invited him on the show today to discuss his work with the Uralic peoples of Western Siberia, his musical projects, and his experience with shamanism. So without further delay, Tuomas, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And I do appreciate your pronunciation. That was well done.
Thank you. I try my best. My Finnish isn't great. I don't get to practice often, but I try.
Well, it sounded better than 99%.
Paljon kiitoksia. Well, thank you again for joining us. We've given you a brief introduction. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, a little bit, and my background is quite a challenge, especially when we're talking about shamanism and things related to the mythical worlds and aspects, because that sort of begins from my early childhood and then develops for the 40 years. So it's actually a big question.
Little or as much as you'd like.
So, and also I gotta ask, like, how far back would you like me to go and start? Or
Well, no. Again, I think we'd like to hear about how everything you've worked on kind of came about. So whatever makes the most sense.
Then I really have to start from the childhood, because the peculiar thing in my childhood was that I started playing the violin at the age of 6, and it was my own decision. We had some classical music recordings in my home, and I totally fell in love with the Bach D minor violin concerto, and I was listening to that all the time. And then actually my cousin started playing violin, and I was really envious. So that's how I started playing. But the peculiar thing was that I wasn't really a prodigy in that sense, like Menuhin or Oistra would have been, traveling all around the world at the age of 12, playing the most demanding concertos. But nevertheless, I was especially talented, and I learned things quickly, and I was a little bit ahead of my age group, so. And the thing was that I was performing in the music school evening matinees. I was performing on those almost weekly with a new song, like not very demanding or difficult songs, but still the thing was that I learned them fast and I was performing them immediately. And the thing is that when I was playing those, when I was performing as a child, I actually fell in a trance state. So in my experience, I lost the sense of time and space, and there was only the music existed while I was playing, and this never happened at home. So I needed that audience, I needed that community around me in order to provide enough momentum to actually fall in a trance state. And as a child, of course, I thought that this is what performing is all about. Surely I didn't know any other way to perform than falling into a trance.
Wow.
And then if we fast forward the story a little bit, at my teenage years, that natural capability, like something that happened to me organically, just went away. And I think there were many reasons to it, but one of the reasons was that at that age you become more self-conscious and self-aware about what you are expected to be like and expected to go through, and all those worries that all of us face on the teenage years. How to be accepted, how to be liked, and how to avoid being disliked. And that's the one of the key moments of our lives when we actually make decisions of conscious domestication. Because as a child we are just sort of absorbing the world and mimicking and learning from outside of ourselves, and thus falling into all sorts of domestications of the mind that our surroundings are full of. But as a teenager, you start to begin to consciously, as an individual, you start to sort of ask those questions. Do I fit in? Does this work? And so I think in general, the teenage years tend to be the years when there's a lot of pressure for the individual to actually become a domesticated adult.
That's a good way of putting it. Absolutely.
And so that process, it's a violent process for all of us. Like at least I haven't heard of lots of ceremonies or rites in the West in modern times where you would actually safeguard the growth of individual to its own direction and free of domestication. So we don't get support for that kind of personal development. So in those years, I lost this capability of falling into the trance state, and tried to fit in, and also I tried to fit in with my playing, and at that time I had started suffering from stage fright, because as a child it was just play. It was just about the music and nothing else, and I fell into the trance state effortlessly. But then it was about, am I allowed to play? Like if I'm not playing enough, if I'm not pleasing the crowd, if it doesn't work for them what I play, then I don't have the right to keep on playing. So it's sort of like a matter of, subconsciously, it was a matter of life and death for me. And oh my, so I warned you, it's a long story.
No, this is great though. This is.
But anyways, then at that time, classical music didn't suffice for myself anymore. I started to explore improvisation and explore different genres of music to sort of break free from the musical rules, to allow myself more freedom. And I was subconsciously, I was already then looking a way to reach back to the playing in a trance state. And then I moved to New York in 1998 and studied in jazz school. And I had some excellent teachers over there. I was studying at the New School University Jazz and Contemporary Music Division, which was actually founded by the bass player of John Coltrane, Reggie Workman.
Oh wow!
So in that school there was a lot of innovative energy and a lot of room to think differently. And also the whole education system in US and in Finland is very different, because in US a student is a customer. You pay a lot of money to be there, so actually you get to say more things about how you spend your time over there. Or at least you do if you are a foreign student.
Funny.
Yeah, but anyways, I found that a very liberating time. And that's actually where my interest on folk music began, because I strongly recommend to everybody to move abroad for a little while in some part of your life, because that's when you start to realize where you come from. It's like the Tom Waits song that says that, I never saw my hometown till I stayed away too long.
Absolutely.
So that's also what happens psychically. So when I was in New York, I became more Finnish than I ever was. And it was actually quite easy because being from Finland was some sort of a thing. It meant something for people. And back home, it didn't meant anything.
Yeah, that's maybe how I feel here in Canada sometimes. But then going on vacation, it's not comparable to going and living somewhere else for a few years. But
it's not like when you take a vacation, you sort of just take a break from your normal life, and you don't necessarily have to think those questions like how it is to be in a different culture. And anyways, so I started to be increasingly interested of my own roots and to understand where I'm from and who am I in a much broader sense than ever before. And I had a fantastic composition teacher, Bob Sadin, who also has worked with Herbie Hancock and Sting and so on and so on. And he was such a wonderful mentor for myself. And also he was so out of the box. He only taught one class, and it was called Special Topics.
Perfect.
And in the second year in a university, we started studying Bartók and the Hungarian folk music behind Bartók's music. And he came to me and said, Tuomas, this is so important what you are doing that you don't have time to come to this school anymore. So you'd better skip all lessons and get serious in what you're doing. And
wow.
And that's what I did. So I spent my days at the NYU library on the 6th floor alone, studying studying scores and Bartók's biographies and all sort of scientific sites. And that's the moment when the ethnomusicologist was born in me. And then I had to go to Hungary to hear the folk music. And this is, I mean, it's just so peculiar how one's life goes. In Hungary, I go to Hungary to study Hungarian folk music and understudy Bartók better. And I meet a scientist who's done field work in Siberia and plays me field recordings from the Khanty people with their ritualistic songs and shamanistic songs. And I go like, wow, I've never heard anything like this. And this is music that I don't absolutely understand a thing about. And then realizing from that moment, I realized that I am actually hearing my own roots 20,000 years ago. Like the similarities between the West Siberian people and the hunter-gathering times of Finnish people. The ecological surrounding is very similar. The cosmology is very similar. So I didn't know this by then, but I sensed it. I sensed that now I'm finding something important that I don't understand what this is, but I feel that it's important. And
that all just gave me goosebumps.
Excuse me?
Oh, that all just gave me goosebumps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And then I come to Helsinki. I'm still living in New York City, but I come to Helsinki. And one of the things I learned from Hungary is that there's this Finnish ethnographic or linguistic man who did field trips to Siberia in 1912 and 1914, and that there are wax cylinders of songs from those field trips. So my only aim in Helsinki was to find those wax cylinders, and I was lucky and I found them. And they had been studied somewhere in 1960s before, so they were really like nobody had been asking for those tapes for a long time. And I found those tapes and got a copy of them, a research copy of those tapes, flew to New York and started listening and studying them. And then comes the moment when I think that, okay, I'm a violinist, I'm a musician, I'm a creative person. The only way for me to understand what I'm hearing is to react to it and work with it. And so I take my violin and start to repeat things that I've been hearing on those wax cylinders, and immediately I fell on the trance tape.
That's amazing.
And this is a life. It's a pivotal moment in my life because it's like a homecoming and becoming conscious after almost a decade of unconscious life, because I wasn't looking for trance. I didn't know what to look. I didn't know what had happened to me in my childhood. I barely even knew that I miss it.
Oh, really?
But life was just somehow dissatisfactory. Like I knew that something was missing. And then when I played those notes for the first time and just like that fell back to that trance state, all those memories come back, all those feelings, all that, this is what I'm missing. This is what I've been longing for. And this is sort of who I am. And
is that something like the fact that it was these things from, as you say, your roots from something like 20,000 years ago? Is that kind of what did it, you think?
Well, that's a good question, because the way I see this is that we've all been colonized. Like here in Finland, we are sort of in a twilight zone in Finland, because we are not quite as the rest of the Western culture is. We still have like one foot in a forest. Like, for example, it's very typical in Finland that people have a summer cottage, and that summer cottage is nearly holy to them. And they have a sauna there, and they work the whole winter in order to afford a long summer holiday to go out and just be on a summer cottage, and just to go to sauna and swim naked in a lake and connect with the nature and just be there. So to me, this is just like a subconscious remnant of the nomadic life that is in our genes and in our history. And if we look at this time of colonization, it ain't that long. It's like 150 years, 200 years. If you go to Central Europe, it's a bit longer, 500, 600 years. But it's not really that long. So if you think of traditions just like shamanism is, or the keening women, the crying women for the funerals, those traditions have been going on for thousands of years. So 100 years of amnesia, it can't destroy those things inside of you. But the question is, how do you access, how do you find your way to those parts of you that still remember? And that's a big question. And I don't think there's an answer to that question in a broader sense, but it's like a journey that each of us is responsible of going through. And for me, it was these songs, it was this music. And when I think back of my life, there are very peculiar things For example, already in my early childhood, it was self-evident for me that the entire universe is resonance. You know, you clap stones together, they ring, they make a sound. So the entire universe has to be resonance. So, you know, I was like this, like already as a child, I was looking at the nature and the universe like this. Not saying that everything is energy, but it ain't that far. You know, everything is resonance, everything is a wave, everything is alive. So, you know, this was really inbuilt, it was innate in me. And I think it was something so bizarre that nobody wanted to touch it or understood that we need to colonize this kid away from this nonsense.
Funny way of putting it.
Yeah.
No, that's fantastic, and you know what we are kind of trying to do with our show here is explore stories and have conversations like this, where it's trying to look at the stories that have kind of been pushed to the side or not forgotten necessarily. Thank goodness we've written some things down, but exploring them, trying to kind of get some meaning. So that's fantastic that you sort of had the same impression of how the world is. That amnesia, that 100-year-old amnesia. I'm envious that it's only that amount of time for you. It's much longer for especially us in North America, where essentially we are the colonizers. You know.
Yeah. And also, like, where's the beginning of that colonization? Because it's like the ideas that the colonizing people brought to the new continent. They didn't invent them on their travels over the Atlantic. So that those ideology and that way of looking at the world was already in there. So the amnesia is longer in some parts of the world.
Can you tell us a little bit about kind of what happened next for you after you found these recordings?
Well, then I had a goal. You know, I had at least I had a direction where to go. So at first I put all my efforts in getting myself to Siberia and sort of go there to explore. And my first trip to Siberia was in 2001 to the Agan River, which is a district where the Khanty and Mansi people live, the Eastern Khanty people. And curious enough, it is also a same area where Russia produces 90% of Russia's oil. That equals 10% of entire oil of that is produced in the whole world. And just to put that in the perspective, Kuwait produced 6% of the world's oil. So it's like we are talking about the massive oil production site. So it was really a mind-boggling journey because I was full of nostalgia in my youth. I was thinking that I'm going over there and I will meet perfect human beings that are unaffected by the modern craziness and so on. So my ideas were very romantic and very tied to nostalgia. And I mean, in a way, I'm still doing the same because I still believe and have experienced that some of it is true, that there are these links between Finns and the Siberian indigenous people that are Finno-Ugric, and there are a lot of interesting links that bind us together. And it's self-evident to me that I can learn more about my prehistory by studying them. but then to sort of think that they would, in a nostalgic way, you sort of think that you can find something more from there, that life would have stopped there. And only a lot later I understood that I was actually having a colonized idea of indigenous cultures. And I was traveling there with very limited perspective and understanding. And this is a big theme. Like if you think back to a history, how do we portray the indigenous people? And like the most famous and iconic artwork is the Edward S. Curtis photographs of the American Indians. And already he was not there to capture present day. He was already, setting up those shots to present past. So whenever we think about indigenous cultures, we tend to have this idea that they were something magnificent in the past, and now they are alcoholics and suffering and in a way of modernity. And even if you don't, even if you don't think that you look at them at this way, I really urge you to be careful, because it's part of our subconscious domestication that goes so deep that even today I get caught sometimes. I'll give one example of this. 2 years ago, we did a theater production for the Finnish National Theater together with Inuits from Greenland, Sami poet and a yoik artist, and a Chukchi woman who lives in Lapland. And the content of that play was their stories, their present day stories. And we got the critics, the Helsinki News, the biggest newspaper in Finland, made a beautiful critic of our play. But the headline of that critic was that Arctic Odyssey, which was the name of the play, brings the stories of the indigenous cultures to present day. And I was like, fantastic. And then I'm like, what did I just read? Brings the stories of indigenous to present day. I mean, we have a 22-year-old, 32-year-old, and 45-year-old person talking about their present day. So who is bringing what to present day?
Sure.
Like it would be absolutely absurd to say that if you would do a play with the youth in Calgary in some not so good neighborhood, and they would be telling their life stories, and then the press would say, bringing the youth stories of that Calgary district to present day. That would be absolutely like nobody would buy it.
And the funny thing, we have plenty of First Nations communities actually right adjacent to Calgary, and certainly, a lot of the issues that you're talking about, they certainly have that, but there's also a lot of fantastic people representing their culture in a positive manner as well. And I think we here are trying to constantly make sense of the issues that are going on today and the legacies of the past, while having respect for the perspectives and the stories. We have a permanent exhibit in our main museum here that is our First Nations from the surrounding area. I don't know if you would consider that kind of just bringing the past to the present, kind of in that perspective, where it's a museum of kind of older things, but it's also a mark of respect. We have a permanent in our fairgrounds here. We have a permanent community for the First Nations as well, and it's
But
I guess it's a constant.
I was there in Calgary. The Blackfoot exhibition you have in Calgary, I think, is absolutely beautiful, and that there's also a good reason to it because it's been done together with the Blackfoot people. So there's real collaboration, there's real connection, and real meeting and real getting together. And the outcome is somewhat a bit, to me, it was a little bit unexpected also to visit that place, because it showed some of the values that you wouldn't think to find, like there's so many items about the tribal wars. And,
yes,
and that's exactly one of the topics that we don't think too often. Like we don't think about the slavery that happened between the different tribes in North America, for example. So we don't address those things usually. To me, it was really a refreshing exhibition because it brought up things, and also there was some trade treaty that was done between the tribes that sort of led to peace for a long time. And I think this was like really interesting, because that's things that we think that we created here in a Western civilization, that we have trade agreements and business, win-win situation in business is better for peace. But, they did that already. The natives did that already. So I think it was really interesting, and that's the whole thing. Like, I don't want to sound like you shouldn't like you shouldn't go. I'm just saying that you need to really check up on your brain and be very cautious. But
right, and I think the other point was that it sometimes is hard to see past the current modern struggles, because that is something that is a reality for many people, and it's hard to really. People have been trying to solve these issues for a long time, and so it can be hard to see past that sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the place we are now in history is that we desperately need collaboration with the First Nations. We desperately need that because some of them have still preserved the authentic way to relate with the nature and to relate with the cosmos. And in my own life, I've been repeatedly surprised how psychological it is. And that's also like one of the big things is that we tend to look at the indigenous cultures as some kind of a unified group that believes in a similar way, that believes to the gods and relates to the spirits in the similar way, as sort of like a unity. But it's all bollocks. I mean, as long as there's been human beings and communities, there's been debate. There's been charismatic people who have thought in this way and persuaded a lot of other people to believe in the same way. And this debate has always been there. And what I find so beautiful in the ceremonies among the indigenous cultures and in the Finnish culture before Christianity is that the ceremonies are actually built in a way that it allows different people to think and relate in a personal and unique way. There's no common statements saying together out loud, I believe. There's no greeting to say, I belong to this group. All this is gone. There's no, reclaiming the faith. Like in all of my studies, I haven't found one example of anything like this. So this is something that totally belongs to the major world religions and to the political way that they are built in today's society and in the societies of the past. So that alone proves to me that when you go to a ceremony in like that is set up in this way, you are not expected to believe anything in a certain way, but you have a room to think and find your own relationship to the things. So, like, I don't think that atheism was born in the West. I think atheism is part of humanity. Like, some people are just orientated differently, and I think that there's been atheism throughout the history of the humanity. But how does it manifest? Does it leave a mark? How is it valued? How is it played out? And of course, this being said, I have to remind that the indigenous communities are very sensitive towards others in this respect. So they don't, if something is holy to someone, they don't interfere. So in their, like, in general, in their way of being, with holy or spirited subjects, is not about telling other people's what to think, but respecting the alignment and communication that someone has.
Right.
No, that's like I think that's sort of the crux between sort of the monotheistic worldview where there's this one way of doing it versus a more animistic or polytheistic where there's actually a whole bunch of different ways to get to the holy and the spirited. And as as products of sort of the colonized West, we start off not having that at all. And it's only when we sort of open ourselves, we can see, like, actually there's a whole bunch of different routes to take, a whole bunch of different roads to take to get to these areas. And you somehow, at least in my experience, you actually somehow get to a very similar place, but you're taking a whole bunch of different roads, and they're very personal to people.
Yeah.
Now, when you were talking about atheists kind of being around there, they're still part of the culture, though, right? Like, it's not like they've kind of divorced themselves from the culture. It's as if the culture is still compatible with not necessarily buying into the full religious experience. Is that accurate?
Well, culture is a bigger thing than religion. I mean, this is culture already. This is what I mentioned, that you have a ceremony that is built in a way that is open for different kind of perceptions. This is already culture. With the Native Americans, I think the Vision Quest is such a beautiful example that their culture had ceremonies, had tasks to help people to in their process of individualization. So that is culture also. And that being said, it's so difficult for us to accept it, like, because it's such an old way of like the scientific thinking that you have to prove something is like something. So it's so difficult to remember that culture is alive. Culture is constant debate. Culture is constant. We preserve this, we renew this, we forsake this, we take this from them, we copy that. This debate is like, if this stops, the culture dies. Because you can put a piece in a museum and then you can say that this is what it was like. But in a museum, we don't get to experience the debate that was around it. And that might have taken hundreds of years. And those cultural differences are really, really big. And now I'm talking a lot about the Native Americans, but just as an example, the Hopi have remained a culture where they don't change much what they do. and they live next to Navajos. And Navajos, like when silver came, Navajos were the first ones to start to make silver jewelry. And so the Navajo culture was finding use for new things quickly, whereas the Hopis were more concerned on preserving the old traditions unchanged. So these tribes live next to each other, and they have a whole different culture already towards this topic. And I think this is important for my personally, because a lot of times, like even though when I think of my tradition and the Finnish music, a lot of people start to say that this is how the tradition was, and this is how you need to do it, and this is how you play those songs, this is how you interpret those songs, because this is the traditional way to do it. Well, if I don't want to play it like that, if I want to do something totally different, am I then, does the song then lose its tradition or traditional value? And by being with communities that are somewhat endangered, like, for example, the forest nenets population is only 1,000 or 2,000 people at the moment, and their language is like, with the Khanty, for example, they had the situation that the grandparents and the grandchildren, they can't speak with each other, because the grandparents don't know Russian and the grandchildren don't know the Khanty language. So we are dealing with sort of tragic, endangered situations where the entire culture can actually die in a matter of a couple of generations.
Right.
And I think the lifeline, like the true lifeline between this, whether a culture dies or survives from the inside, is that do you find a way to balance with the old and new? Do you have a creative process when the ones preserving the culture and the ones renewing the culture actually come together and work together and appreciate the value of each other? If they do, the cultures survive. There's no dying, because they are creating mechanisms, survival mechanisms, by working together.
Right. They're encountering the unknown situations of the present and integrating that with the old traditions, and therefore it can live.
And the Sami yoik is such a beautiful example of this. The Sami yoik was very close to becoming extinct because there was such a strong ideas who can yoik. If you are from this district, then you can yoik in this yoik dialect, and there were so many people who were not allowed to yoik, and so many people who were so strict on these things. And then in 1960s comes one man, Niels Aslak Valkeapää, who started yoiking with Finnish musicians. I mean, that was unheard of. That was blasphemy. He started yoiking to a microphone. I mean, what the fuck? And he broke all of the taboos in the yoik. And he wasn't even the best yoiker, but he was the one who had the courage to think beyond and break those rules. And he was so hated at the time. And then, comes the day when he's the first Sami artist whose song has ever been played on the radio. And the whole country hears him singing. And people start to admire him, But the point is that it all happened from a struggle. And nowadays, all of the Sami yoik artists, simply all of them, no matter if they are from Norway, Sweden, or Finland, all of them say that without Valkeapää, without Ailu, they would not dared to start yoiking. They would never had an idea that they could actually have a profession as a musician.
Fair enough. And I mean, you got to have those pioneers, but it sounds like the situation is even more extreme than even kind of in like our society, where it's kind of like you're expected to have innovators, but to go against that tradition, that's quite something. I suppose they would say that Jonne Järvelä would not be allowed to yoik something like that.
Well,
does he get that?
I know that some of the Sami people think like that, and some of the Sami people think that he's sort of all right, but not doing it quite right. But then you have to remember that Jonne actually was doing some reindeer herding, and he had a Sami wife, and they have a son together, and so Jonne was totally taken into one big Sami family, and he learned yoiking from the Sami people, doing reindeer herding with them. And then again, there are a lot of Sami people who think that that yoik is their gift to the world. Yoik is it's the gift of the Sami people to the world, and everybody who is interested, everybody who is doing it, is sort of learning from the Sami, but the problem, why this is so problematic, is that we have a tourist industry in Lapland, and we have Finnish people who put on a Sami hat and start acting like a total idiot and doing pseudo yoiks that don't have anything to do with the Sami culture. So of course this is offensive to them, and it's sensitive. It's really sensitive for them. This, like, if I go there and start to yoik, the first impression is not how is he yoiking, but it's like sort of like, is he mocking us? Is he doing this with the purpose of just mocking our tradition?
Well, I think there is no way anyone here who is, Caucasian European descent would be, if we went to and tried to do some Native American music ourselves, unless there's some extreme exceptional circumstances, I think there's no way that would ever be allowed, because they're maybe even, I wouldn't say more sensitive, maybe more protective of their culture, certainly. Not to say that the Sami aren't, but there's no way that would be allowed here.
Yeah. Well, the history is sadly very similar between the Arctic indigenous cultures. Like, we in Finland, we've done horrible things to the Sami community. Like, we've forced assimilated them into the Finnish culture as fiercely as we possibly could have, and there are a lot of wounds, and it's still unresolved. It's absolutely unresolved, even today. Just to give a quick example, there's this truth and reconciliation movement that is sort of like, it has a good cause, but not enough skill to carry it through. And right now, the Finnish government last year had started something like a truth and reconciliation process between the Sami, but they backed off from the truth. So it's called only reconciliation process.
Oh, interesting.
So I mean, just how fucked up is it all can be? How can you have a reconciliation if you don't address truth?
Well, definitely. I know in Canada we have this interesting problem where the laws regarding the First Nations are basically directly still, they've gone sort of unchanged since colonization, and there's sort of this expectation that, centuries later things are going to be able to get better without addressing the first, these first causes of, well, we're still literally using laws that are from colonization. So it's a weird, and no one seems willing to touch it, but we've had truth and reconciliation attempts as well, but I think one of the latest ones, let's call them bureaucrats who were doing it. They basically showed up and got paid and then left and charged everyone for everything. And it was just a disaster. So,
yeah. And it's like we still seem to have a difficulty in addressing these things. Like broadly in our cultures, it's a difficult topic. And for myself, it's not that difficult. For me, it's really easy. It's just like address the truth and, go beyond the presumptions and go beyond of those things. And also, like what you said, that you wouldn't have a way to sort of go and do the Native American music over there. It's also sort of like, I'd like to encourage people to go over that fear. Because if you are respectful, if you go from the heart, you will be recognized. Like nobody doubts you when you go with your full heart. And if you allow me another story from the Khanty community, what we did over there was that like there's a lot of talk nowadays about the cultural appropriation. And I don't think it's a problem at all. I think it's a symptom. It's a symptom of a very serious problem. But by sort of talking a lot about the cultural appropriation, we sort of make that a problem and try to fix that. And if we could fix this, we wouldn't have to go and address the real history, the real horrors that happened. If only we could manage so that these idiots don't buy the fake costumes and present them in a museum anymore, we could then maybe forget the history too. So this is like this was a pretty rough statement, but this is a one aspect inside of it. So for me, the problem is in the history. The problem is how people meet, how people look at each other, how people go with all this colonization and all this domestication, and what the sides are, and the untold history. So what happened, this is a beautiful story about the cultural appropriation. In 2009, we went over to the Khanty again with a small theater group. And there's a beautiful book from Jeremy Aipin, a Khanty author and a politician, who wrote a book called A Last Morning Star. And that book is really about the history of the Khanty people. It starts from 1950s, and the main character is Jeremy's own father, who was still living a nomadic life. And he meets oil drilling people for the first time. And so he goes through the history of the Khanty people, how they coped with difficult situations. How did they meet with change? So that he can welcome the oil drilling people in a right spirit, so that they can respect each other and collaborate. And he says things there like the worst thing to happen is fight over the land, like because in that nomadic setting nobody owns the land. The land owns us. So in that sense, if you start to fight about the land, you are lost already. So all these beautiful ideas he sets up, and while you read it, it's so dramatic because you really want to be in his side. You really understand that he's the wise one, but at the same time, you really know all the time that this is not going to work. This is not going to end pretty, and it doesn't at the end of the book. And it's historically a correct book in a way that it's a lot of the events in that book are real historical events. And it addresses the Stalin's time and the suppression of the Stalin and how the shamans were killed during the Stalin regime. So so we wanted to make a play out of this. And we went to the Khanty people and met with Jeremy Aipin, spent time in his family lands and learned from them. And they gave us some gifts, a belt, for example, that we could wear in a play. Then we come to Finland, and of course we have theater costumes. We can't have like real Khanty costumes. And we had a big debate about this while doing the play, because it felt so ridiculous to put on those fake costumes and act a Khanty on stage. And we talked a lot about it. We talked a lot about, should we do some kind of explanational thing or some. And then at the end, we concluded that we cannot do it. This is theater. This is a play of, like, if we don't have the courage to do this play, why do it in the first place? And so we did that. We had those fake costumes. And then 2 years later, we took this play to the Khanty people, and we wanted them to see it, and we wanted them to give us feedback on what have we done. So we really went there with open hearts, sort of like, we did our best. Give us the feedback, kill us if you want to, but we did our best at least, And, we were a bit uncomfortable and ashamed of the clothes, for example. And the main actor met one of the Khanty people in a theater and was like saying something like, I feel uncomfortable wearing this costume. And I know that it's not as it should be. And the Khanty guy looked at him and was like, well, how could you have any better ones in Finland? Stop whining. Sure, I understand that you can't have any better ones. And
that's
then
amazing.
When we did that play, it really is one of the most meaningful situations in my life. When the play ended, the entire audience wanted to be on stage with us and to have photographs with us. People were crying, people were laughing, people were like all over the place. And then they started to give speeches. It wasn't part of the program, so it just happened. And there were people saying that this was not theater. This was real life. This was how the things were happened. And the person who said this is actually a son of one character who gets murdered in that play. So you actually have like an eyewitness for those events that we include in a play, saying that this was not theater, this was reality, this is how it happened. In one of the school, we did one school performance, and one of the teachers stood up after the play and started shouting to the kids, "Do you understand what you just saw? This is your history. This is your history. Do you understand?"
That's incredible.
And for the Khanty people, it was the first time that a Western group came over and made a play out of their history and got it right. And of course, that was our purpose, to get it right. But you can be sure that it wasn't self-evident. And it was damn scary to go over there and perform it to them. There's a scene in that play where I'm a Khanty shaman. And, to do that for the first time in front of the Khanty audience, knowing that there are descendants of Khanty shamans in the audience, I felt really like, who the fuck am I at beating this drum?
Yeah. I bet.
But the thing is that what we did was more important. It was more important than the clothes. It was more important than any of the cultural appropriation bullshit. It was addressing real history, being witness, showing that we have heard your stories. This is how we saw them. And getting recognized sort of in both ways. Sort of like, for them it was like, For most of them, they could have not dreamt this to happen ever, that any white group could witness them as they feel that their history has been. And this is what we should be doing. This is how we should be meeting each other and going to the native cultures. Not like, what can I do to help you? That's all bullshit. You can't do a shit to help them. But, sort of like, just be there and take responsibility of things that we can't take responsibility. We can't take responsibility of all that bullshit that happened in the past generations. We can't. But still we can address that responsibly. And that's a big, big, big difference.
Definitely. That's something that we're certainly struggling with here to come to terms with, and it's a big debate. But that's amazing that you and your group was able to do this. That sounds like a really amazing experience. This is probably not the deepest question relating to this at all, but how did you present the play to them? I'm assuming that the Khanty don't speak Finnish.
No, yeah. Well, that was the thing. That there were a lot of funny things in this process, and first of all, it's a Khanty author who has written this book in Russia, then translated to Finnish, and then we do a play out of it. And actually, there's an opening song in that play had an interesting story too, because it's originally a mythical Khanty song about people who take their reindeer sledges and actually ascend to the skies. So it's a myth, a mythical song, and this text of that mythical song is in Jeremy's book in a prose form, and then I have the Finnish translation of that, and I make a poetic form out of the prose form, and then make a song out of it in Finnish. So like a total whirlpool, and we had a translation in Russia for it, but in our premiere, the projector wasn't working. So we had to play for them without any translation. But so it happened that those people knew those stories by heart. They knew all of them. So they didn't need anything. Like, they could really follow. They could probably understand more about the play than we did.
Sure. That's amazing.
This is one of the most, I want to say, like, magical stories about art and play and theater that I think I've ever heard. Like, this is incredible. Like, this demonstrates the power of stories and art and theater, and I guess coming at these things with an open heart.
Yeah. And also, like, the thing is that we don't have to know. We don't have to get it right. But the thing that is important is that we are conscious of our intention, like that we really, like, our intention is clear to us. Like, when I went to Siberia for the first time, I wasn't the person who can consciously have an intention of something that huge, and it was important that I went there. But as I've grown older and a little bit wiser, I hope, the wiser you get, the more responsible you become about setting your intention. But that's a powerful thing. Like, when your intention is clear, you can actually have the freedom of choosing when if people react to what you are doing in an absurd way, you still know that I set this up with the right intention.
Certainly some people don't recognize that fully these days.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of us just live in a reaction, like whatever happened in our childhood, whatever happened in our relationship, whatever happened with our neighbor, we are still sort of just living a reaction to that. And we don't sort of stop and set a conscious intention, sort of like, what do I want this to be? What I really want from this? What is important? What is unimportant? And sort out the seeds of those events and set an intention straight, and to move away from the affect of things.
So I've got a question about your, I guess, combining of Khanty shamanic music and the Karelian laments.
Oh yeah.
Did you find? I mean, that's obviously something that's new, and you're kind of combining different traditions. Did you find any resistance to that? Was there any charges of like cultural appropriation that you shouldn't be doing this?
Well, funny enough, so far only a very few, and those are also coming from witty white people.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. And I mean, shaman violin, for example, like if I would be doing it today, I would not dare to call it like that. Like how it all happened was that, I was in my 20s. I had found a way to play violin in a trance state. I had found something that sort of like in my spirit put me in alignment with my real purpose in this life. And I had found it through their songs. So then I start to do the first shows. And, Tuomas Rounakari plays violin. Doesn't mean a thing. People are like, is he going to play Mozart? So that was sort of like question. Nobody knows me. Nobody knows what I do. And what I do is pretty damn weird. So, how do I explain this? And at that time, I wasn't even saying out loud that I'm accessing a trance state. That was my own secret. That was my own sort of thing as a performer. And I didn't have the guts to say it out loud at that time. And then comes a producer and said, like, well, what are you playing then? And I'm like, well, I'm playing these wax cylinders from the Siberian shaman. And he's like, well, let's call it the shaman violin. I'm like, oh, I don't know about that. It sounds kind of heavy. But then, then it was done. And for the lack of a better name, it stayed. And then I released an album called Shamanviolin. And I had this idea that it's a band name, that Shamanviolin is a band name. But nobody understood the one-man band, that it has a name. So the sooner that I realized myself, people started to call me shaman violinist, which is sort of like, you don't call Bruce Dickinson an Iron Maidenist. No. So it was just as absurd for me when that started happening, but there was no way stopping it. And I think that at the end, my concerts were small. I didn't have a big audience, but they were meaningful to the people. A lot of, weird shit happened in those gigs.
I would believe it, absolutely.
And the thing is that when you get exposed to this kind of music, we don't hear it in the radio anymore. And this sort of like goes to your question with the laments and the Khanty music. So this is music that is composed in a different way. It's composed in a way that the rhythm can't be divided in any dance steps. So there's just a pulse, There's a pulse that carries it, but there's no one that repeats after every 4 beats. And there's a beautiful story to this about the Native American drumming. They say there's and one of the elders once gave a presentation about it and said that we have 3 ways to play the drum. One is heartbeat, and then he plays the dum 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 dum. One is walking, and it's a dum 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 dum. And then we have John Wayne. Dum 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 dum. And the reason he said it's John Wayne is because it never existed before the Hollywood movies.
Oh, interesting.
And this is important because the pulse without a fixed rhythm is actually it's a key to altered states of mind, and it's always been consciously used for that purpose. So when you get exposed to this type of music that has this different energy, things start to happen in your body and in your subconscious, you know. So people felt empowered. They felt like they had re-established their connection to their roots. You know, they became more conscious about some places in a nature that have always been special for them throughout their whole lives. You know, these kind of things started commonly happen in my gigs, that people experience these things. And now I'm losing my goal.
Well, we were talking about the shamanic music and how that sort of matched up with the laments.
Yeah. So the laments, the laments, for me, it was an opportunity to study the shamanistic layer of Finnish tradition without needing to go all the way to the Siberia. Because the laments still carry, they are relative. Like the shaman songs in the Siberia and the laments, they belong to the same musical family group of song styles. And I quickly realized it after I became more acquainted with the laments. Like I met old lament lady who had evacuated during the Second World War to the Finnish side, but who had learned the laments in her childhood, but then couldn't, like it wasn't appropriate to sing those laments in the Finnish culture. So she had been silent for a long time. But then her husband died and she started lamenting because there was nobody nobody too close saying not to do it. So thank God the husband died first. And she started performing laments and became quite famous in Finland for carrying that tradition. So when I met her and started studying with her, I very quickly realized that I'm dealing with the same musical patterns that I found in the shamanic music in the Siberia, and the same mechanisms and techniques in music. And it's so beautiful just to think that those songs were used in the rites of passage to both spiritually to escort the deceased, to escort that soul from this realm to the other realm, but also to escort the community, to take the community to really understand the change, the permanent change that has happened through someone's dead. So the meanings and mechanisms of those songs, both inside the community and in the cosmological, is so massive that I started studying those songs first and foremost, and sort of felt that there I have a gate to understand in a more deeper way the Siberian shamanistic tradition just as well. And it felt really good to find something like that close to home, to study it as my own culture.
I'm sure, because my understanding of it is that the Khanty Mansi, they're first of all, the closest relation is the Hungarian language, if I am remembering correctly. But then even further than that, it's the earliest split off from the common ancestor to Finnish. So they're like as distantly related as you can get, with the possible exception of the Samoyeds. Is that all? I'm trying to fit a few things in there.
Well, you've been studying really well. That's how the scientists see it today, and it's really interesting to see what the DNA studies and all that we know about genes will bring forth to this, because we don't know who the Finns really are, and now the most recent studies say that the Finnish men carry a gene that came to Finland only 2,000 years ago, and it came from the Eastern Siberia. So that's really interesting to think that majority of our population from the male side is carrying this gene, but the female are carrying another gene more prominently.
Wow.
But this is really like recent studies, so better not to wave the flag too much yet. But it's very interesting what we are finding, because what you are referring to is a linguistic tradition and studying this, approaching this linguistically, and sometimes the genes are not backing up that knowledge. But then again, it's so complicated because culture and genes don't go together. They just
right.
don't.
The languages are one way of looking at it, that at least sort of connect it to the cultures as they would have existed, right? Something like that?
Yeah. And also, one group of genetic group can adopt another culture at some point of the time. And so to say that 10,000 years ago, this gene group was, this way of thinking was belonging to this gene group is pretty demanding.
Well, yeah, as I understand it, something like the Hungarians, as a related example, they find themselves closely related, at least culturally, to the Huns proper.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of beautiful cultural evidence to this. First of all, between the Magyar people, the Hungarians, and the Mansi and Khanty, they have a myth in the Hungarian, and it's really a well-known myth and regarded as a historical fact, that this man, I'm so sorry, I don't remember. They have statues of him all over Hungary, but the man who established Hungary, that he came from the northeast, and he saw a white goose and a swan together, and these are holy animals. And because he saw those two birds together, he concluded that this is a holy land marked for this people, that this is where we settle and this is where our home now is. And the Khanty people have a myth of a group of them leaving to the southwest in search of a white goose and a white swan. It's mind-blowing, right?
It's that really exactly.
And something that is really close to my own research is the bear feast and the bear cults. And in Finland, we have the myth of the bear's origin. The bear is a son of the celestial father. And now when I say celestial father, you'd better quickly erase all Christian things and just think of a non-physical bear.
Okay.
So there's your
Sounds
celestial father. So the bear is a son of the celestial father. And the bear looks down upon the earth and it's like, it's so beautiful over there that Dad, I want to go down. I want to explore that place. I want to go down. And the father says that son, you don't know what you're talking about. It's a rough place. It's hard life down there. Like over here we have everything. It's easy. But if you go down, it's rough. It's really hard. And the son is like, but it looks so beautiful. Everything looks like gold from looking from above. And I really want to be there. And he said, well, you got to hunt your own food over there. You will come to know starvation. It's really not a good idea. But Father, I want to go. And then the father gives up and decides that, well, fine, go on. And now comes an interesting thing, a detail. The bear descends from the sky from a golden cradle, which is held from the skies by silver chains. So the bear descends from heavens to the earth in a golden cradle by silver chains. Then the bear moves on. So this is the Finnish mythology, the Finnish origin of the bear. And sadly, from our archives, this is the end of it, because pretty much all of the poems that have the origin of the bear continue by spells to protect the cattle. So the origin of a bear belongs to the hunter-gatherer communities. But then in the poems that we've collected in the 18th and 19th centuries, it's already agricultural, and the origin of a bear is incanted in order to reach the bear entity, and then to tell that bear entity that don't come near to our cattle. Our cattle doesn't belong to you. So there's a shift in these poems that couldn't have existed before. Well, now the Khanty and Mansi people have this exact same beginning, word to word. It's descending in the skies in a golden cradle with use of the silver chains. Exactly same words, exactly same images. And then the bear comes down to the ground, and then slowly develops into a physical form of a bear. Needs a fur to survive in a winter. Needs to find food. Needs to start walking in four legs, which they didn't originally do in the myth. Like in the skies, they no need for walking by force. And it's also peculiar that the bear is actually quite a lousy hunter. It's such an intelligent animal, but it's a pretty lousy hunter. So it still, collects berries. It still catches fish sometimes, but it also has to eat dead corpse. So it's not like a good predator like a wolverine would be, or a wolf. So this is also addressed there in the myth, that the bear is a sort of a newcomer, doesn't really know the tricks, and has to learn them by the hard way. So the Khanty have preserved the end of the poem and the development of the bear, but the beginning is identical, word to word identical.
And just seeing that, I think the point I was trying to get at earlier was that it's comparatively distant when the Khanty and the Finns, what would have become the Finns, split off, right? But to have such similarity there, that's really, really fascinating and mind-blowing.
And also the Khanty people, originally, they have a mythical name for the Finnish people, which is the ones who went across the big sea. And this is pretty bizarre because nowadays, geographically, there is no water between us. Just the Ural Mountains would be the big obstacle. But then again, the memory of these poems goes so far back that now I don't know the word in English, but there's what's described in the Bible with the Noah story, when the water
with the flood.
Water flood, yeah. But maybe there's even a bigger word to it.
Oh, like before the flood?
No, the water flood that sort of takes over the whole world.
Well, I know if you're referring in English, if you're referring to antediluvian is before, but
the flood myth. That's
what we call
it.
Just
you
the
just
flood
call
myth.
It flood myth. Yeah, well. Our language is a bit more developed here. We have a different.
I was going to say.
Probably you do too, but we just don't figure it out now. But anyway, it is possible that these stories are older than the flood that is referred to in the Bible traditions and that oral traditions that are behind Bible. See how precise I am. I'm not saying Bible traditions. I'm saying oral traditions behind the Bible.
Right. No, it's funny, and it's actually it's interesting enough to. We both have been raised Christian, but I kind of refused to touch it for a few years after I kind of went away from Christianity a little bit. But then looking at some of the first stories in the Bible, you can actually see the remnants and the traditions that came before. Later on, it starts to lose that, and it's the new innovations. But it's the really early part of the Bible. I think reading that and kind of seeing the similarities to some oral traditions, that gave me a little bit of hope that the similarities there are kind of more universal anyway. That they had some origins that were similar to all of these oral traditions.
Well, that's all about the nature of myth, because myths do address the collective subconscious, and myths address the subconscious mind that. To some extent, all of us humans share that. To some extent,
sure,
and that's how they are so useful. That even today, you could be inspired by Finnish myths without any background and any memory of Finnish ancestry, but then who knows? Who knows? Maybe there's a half of a dust particle of a Finn in your genes. Who knows? Who knows? And
well, it's funny. I've been told something like that because I was trying to learn Finnish since I was 14 years old. For who knows why? I don't know why. Yeah. I just liked some of the music and then started learning, and that's kind of been that. But I have no idea if I have any Finnish ancestry. But I appreciate that that you say it's all right to be inspired by this stuff, because it really is inspiring.
Yeah, to me, ancestors are a big thing for me. And the way I look at the ancestors is that at the end of the day, we don't have a clue who they are. And
sure.
And so and even the DNA tests that are so widely popular nowadays, they only tell one side of that story. And the tragedy of human life is that we are so attached to that ancestry that we can physically remember. And to me, there's such a beautiful mystery in my own life regarding the ancestors. The way I see the ancestors, like my own ancestors, is that I see the family. I see the extended family. Then I see the extended family. And then it's not only those physical lines, but also the web of relations that those people had, the web of influences those people had. And then beyond that comes the forgotten ancestry, the stories we don't know, the stories that we will never hear. And then even behind that comes even the layer of non-physical ancestry, the sort of the idea of us, the idea of our family line, the origin, the birth of our family line. That came from somewhere. There was some intention there. There was some conscious intentions that set forth this line of people. And who knows, maybe it was a bear.
Why not, right?
Yeah. And that's also kind of a thing, like when we start to think about the non-physical ancestors and totem animals and you name it. We are actually just giving symbols to things that we can't address otherwise.
Yeah. It's like representation of ideas that are being worked through.
We need those images to align with the energy behind it. Because if we are just like being like, if we're just like want to be precise with what it is, sort of like giving a cosmic analysis of the non-physical, then we're just all spiritual. We're not in our bodies. We're not living our lives. We're not using what we are.
Those are the ways that we get in touch with those things, but we can't describe it, right? Like we can't describe it in words. It's got to be through symbols, something like that.
Do you think we've lost some of that ability to describe or use symbols in the modern world? And then, I guess, if so, do you think that's sort of part of the reason why there seems to be almost like a spiritual sickness in the modern world?
Well, it's difficult to say because so much has happened. The change in humanity has been so fast and so massive that. But one thing that seems self-evident, it seems that humanity by large has been researching and studying themes of disconnection with nature, and that disconnection proves it shows itself, for example, in the mass extinction of the species that we are witnessing right now. The elders in Siberia and in Native America, and I believe that the elders that the colonization have killed in Finland, I think they all shared this idea that this world exists because somebody dreamt it. Somebody dreamt it into being, and the ones who dreamt it, they loved it. So they share this idea of our ancestors that the nature of today exists because our ancestors loved it. And the Khanty even say that the nature needs a human being to look after it. It's peculiar. And what does it mean to look after it? It actually means to maintain a conscious love and admiration towards it. That's what it means. It doesn't mean to dust off your hunting bath. But it means maintaining a conscious admiration to nature, and thus paying attention to little details that make a lot of difference. and living together with the changes of that. So this was a process that they considered as a process of love, as conscious love, that actually is crucial. That the world dies if the love dies. And we are the ancestors of future. We are the ancestors of tomorrow. So what we love is what the future generations will see. And to me, this is really a logical. Like, this is not spiritual at all. This is really logical. It's like, if the whole humanity loves supercars, we will develop a lot of them. And the future generations will witness those supercars. They will look back like, what did they do? Well, there's this and this mechanism that they invented, and we're still using it, and we are still improving it. But I think there's sort of like the bottom line of it is that we've lost some of the appreciation to the nature. We've lost some of the basic skills. What the Native Americans, they teach it about basic consciousness. The basic consciousness is that you address the basic elements of water, fire, earth, and wind. That you address those elements in your daily life. That you thank the water. Like you understand that water that you have in your glass that you are drinking in the morning, you consciously understand that that's the same water that created the world. That's the same water that was there when the ocean, when the life came out of the ocean. That's the same water. The water doesn't go away from our atmosphere. So it keeps circulating. So this is also like scientifically true. Like water doesn't evaporate to the outer space. Our climate sends it back. So when I have a glass of water in my mind, in my glass, in a glass in my hand, in my mind, I'm conscious that this is the same water that created the whole life on Earth. And I thank that water and I drink that water. And with that process, I thank the water in me, and thus I enhance all of the life-supporting mechanisms inside of myself. And this alignment with water is what they call basic consciousness, that you are aware.
Wow, that's that's quite something.
Yeah, and this is something anybody can do anywhere. And when you start applying this to practice, just like pausing daily with water, thanking the water, and consciously addressing this, things start to change. You simply start to change things different. You see the world differently very soon. Go ahead, give it a week. No. Give it a week. Go for it. Yeah.
No, that's
it's wild to think about. Like, even while you're doing it, just that's the same water.
Yeah.
And it's grounded in what? It's grounded in mythology, scientifically, and then even, with your own understanding of it. That's really something. I'd never heard that before.
No, I hadn't heard that before either.
That's a great approach.
Yeah. Well, we've had a good 2 hours here.
Yeah,
we certainly
You want to wrap up somehow?
Yeah. Exactly. So let us just quickly, if you would like to mention anything that you're working on currently or have coming up, or any social media, if you want to promote anything like that.
Well, sure. We have a new album coming out with Korpiklaani on September 7th, an album that we are very proud of. Like, I think we've really nailed it this time. And what's so different with this album is that we have a new producer, and maybe you've realized, if you've been a fan for a long time, that the balance between folk and metal is something that we've kept searching for it.
Right.
Then, there were times when hit this was leaving the band and was not that motivated and had health issues. And you can actually hear that in the album, that the violins are sort of gone or vanished to the backside in some of the albums in the before Ukon Vakka. Then I came in for the Manala album, and then Sami came in for the Noita album. And so the metal part of Korpiklaani has stayed the same for quite a long while. Except that Jonne has stopped playing guitar, which is such a relief. I mean, he's such an amazing singer. And for him to hide behind the guitar, he wasn't that amazing as a guitar player. So when you take the guitar out of his hand, his singing has really improved and stage presence has really improved.
Yeah, and he's done some amazing shows when he's just the singer interacts with the audience.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
really, really great.
And so then in Noita album, we'd really found a beautiful balance with the folk and metal, that they were really present. But now with this album, it went even further. The balance is pretty much the same as it is in Noita album, but now me and Sami, we are playing more in a folk style too. Of course, I'm playing also in my own style, which is kind of like, there are my moments of going ugly with it and so on. But that's, having fun with it. But the thing is that in this album, there are moments that we play a little bit of tango there, and we play a little bit this and that over there, and it's so wild and a brave album, so that it's really uncompromised. It's not like asking what the label wants us to do or what the fans want us to do, but it's sort of like, just there's something very authentic in this album, like really about, like, I think that you actually get to sort of hang out with us when you listen to this album, because it's so like, there are a lot of first takes in it. There's a lot of the fun that is in us as a group is there in this album, the unpredictable things. And just as the previous producer didn't, he always cut away things where Jonne's voice were cracking or like this, but now this new one was like, this sounds cool, let's keep this. So you have this sort of a much more organic feel to the whole sound of it.
Oh, that's really exciting, and the singles and the music videos that are out already are really, really quite good. I've especially enjoyed Henkselipoika. That music.
Yeah. It's a fun song. It's really a lot of fun, and
the video you guys did around it too was really, really. I think it's one of my favorite music videos I've seen in a long time.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm really glad, because we do those videos with such a low budget that it's like, it's always like a bit of a shameful process for us. So, but that one really came out nicely. It really did.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So very much looking forward to the album, and certainly looking forward to you've got a North American tour coming up, right?
Yeah, that's in November. And also, like, I would so much love to come to US with the Shaman violin. I've been doing, when I was living in New York, like there's I've once done a show in Arizona, Flagstaff, Arizona, with the Shaman violin, and once in New York. But I would really like to come over with the Shaman violin sometime and do a tour with that too. But maybe one day. Keep dreaming.
Keep fingers crossed for that. That'd be awesome.
For it, if you keep dreaming for it, it will happen.
Sounds good.
Definitely we'll be doing that. Well, great. I think we'll just wrap up here really quickly, and if you don't mind just staying on the line, and we can wrap up with you. Okay, so just as our usual thing, we're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, either Northern Myths or Northern Myths podcast. For all of them, we're both on Twitter. I'm North Myth Luke. Dan is North Myth Dan. And check out our YouTube channel as well. We got some clips from the show coming out. And beyond that, get in touch with us. We love comments, and really have enjoyed having Tuomas Rounakari here. It's really been a fantastic treat to have you.
Yeah,
really,
time flies. Time flies. This was fantastic for me as well.
It was a great conversation, and I don't think we even touched on. You warned us on basically any of the specific things we want to get into, but that doesn't matter at all. We would love to have you back on anytime, really, perhaps after your tour is all wrapped up. But you got a standing invitation.
Who knows? Maybe we can do something in November when I come over. So.
Well, if you insist, I mean,
we would love that.
That'd be great.
Really, we would. Yeah, absolutely. So it's been fantastic having you on, and I think we'll leave it at that with our usual go forth and find out what myths you're living.
Yeah.
This has been the Northern Myths Podcast. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, guys.